Varmt välkomna till kvällens webbinar. Vi kommer ju att ha en intervju med Michael Mosley som alla vet, och den kommer självklart att ske på engelska. Men jag kan glädja er med att säga att vi har möjlighet att få den översatt. Så om en vecka så kommer den här att finnas att titta och lyssna på med text på svenska. Now I think it's time for me to welcome Michael Mosley to the 1.6 million club and our webinar. And we are so proud and happy to be able to meet like this with you. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here. Greetings from England.
Yes, we realize that you are in England, in London, is it?
Just outside London, about 20 miles outside, about 30 kilometers. Yeah.
And I was a little worried because we heard on the news that the situation with the COVID-19 is again rising in England. Is that so?
It is. It's rising quite fast now. So the government are doing all sorts of lockdowns in different cities. So I have 4 children, and one of them is a doctor up in Manchester, which has just gone into lockdown because it has some of the highest rates in the UK. And my daughter is in Nottingham, which again is one of the highest. And I have a son indeed 2 sons in London, and they're about to go into lockdown as well. So yes, it's my children seem to be in all the hot spots at the moment.
Oh, but what about in London? You can move about fairly freely, or?
Yes, I mean what they're doing there now is they say that you're not allowed to stay with other people who you're not part of your group, your family, and that if you're meeting up with friends, you have to meet up outside, and then only in groups of 6. And they're also closing the bars and the pubs at about 10 o'clock at night. So indeed, they may close them entirely. That's one of the things they're discussing at the moment, because it's obviously in the bars and clubs that people drink and then they shout and then they, spray bars around. So yeah, unfortunately, after a quiet summer, things are taking off again, although I think everyone expected that to happen. Everyone expected a second wave. As it gets colder, people go indoors and the virus spreads.
Yes, well, we do have a more severe situation in Sweden as well after our summer, when it quieted down, unfortunately. But it's not, I think, not yet, I should say, perhaps as bad as it seems to be with you. Anyway, let's leave that for the time being. Now we're very happy to be able to talk to you about your latest book and about your previous book. And I was going to start out by of course, saying that we are just in the Nobel Prize season, as you know, of course. And last week, we learned that there were 3 Nobel Prize laureates in medicine. And they are Alter, Horton, and Rice. Is that so?
That is true. Yep.
And what are their, why do they get the Nobel Prize in medicine?
Right. So they got the Nobel Prize in medicine for identifying a new virus, which is called hepatitis C. So when I was at medical school in the 1980s, we knew about hepatitis A, which you get from water, and hepatitis B, which is transmitted more in blood. And these are called hepatitis because what happens is they are viruses that infect your liver. And if you don't treat them, then you get liver failure, liver sclerosis, and things like that. But there were a lot of people who were getting ill, hepatitis, and they were dying after blood transfusions. And they didn't have hepatitis A or B. So people didn't understand what was going on. And what these 3 did was they identified a new virus, which they called hepatitis C. And that in turn led to new treatments, and their discovery saved millions of lives. So it was a very big thing, and that's why they won Nobel Prize.
Oh, yes. Well, I ought to, of course. I was impolite. I should have introduced you, even in English, saying that you're a doctor and you're a medical journalist and you are the author and writer of several books. And of course, you are the host of several TV programs on health and wellness and medical research and things like that. And of course, you also told me that you were friendly with a previous Nobel laureate that you even worked together with. Tell us.
Yes, so this was quite a long time ago. It was in the 1990s, so more than 25 years ago. And it was a guy called Professor Barry Marshall. And he was a young doctor in Perth in Western Australia. And in the 1980s, he had made a remarkable discovery. Because at the time, everyone believed that stomach ulcers were caused by stress. So I don't know if you remember when stomach ulcers were very common, you had real pain in your stomach. And when they put a scope down, they could see an area of, where there were erosions in the stomach.
Yes.
And the advice at the time was that you had to have a less stressful life. You ate bland food and you took a drug called Zantac, which was the best-selling drug of all time.
Oh.
And, it was a miserable existence. And what Barry did is he discovered, because he used to kind of, with his patients, if the medicine didn't work, then he had to cut their stomachs out. And he started looking at the stomachs, and he found in the stomachs a new bacteria that no one had seen before, which was a sort of shaped like a crescent, and it was called Helicobacter pylori. And so he was convinced that this was the real cause of ulcers. And he couldn't infect animals. And so what he did in the end is he basically grew it up, and then he just drank it down just in one go. Here, a mug of Helicobacter.
Oh, God.
And a few days later, he started to vomit blood. And so he had a telescope put down into his stomach, and there they could see the bacteria growing and an ulcer in his stomach. So he treated himself with antibiotics, and it all went away. And I made a film with him in the early 1990s at a point where everyone still thought he was completely mad. So I made a film. I was convinced he was right. I said he is right. The film went out, got quite a lot of criticism from the medical professionals who said, no, this is crazy. But 10 years later, he won the Nobel Prize for Medicine. So, and we have been friends ever since.
There you are. Fantastic. So you knew from the beginning that he was right.
Yes, he had
incredible.
A lot of...
Yeah. Is that when you started having an interest for, talking about the stomach, talking about thinking about diets, thinking about your 5.2 diet, or how did you get into that?
Sure. It wasn't quite like that. What it led me to do was it got me very interested in self-experimentation and the idea of doing horrible things to yourself. So I then started to be a television presenter, and I did films where I did things like infect myself with tapeworm to see what I could do, which was nice. But in in 2012, which is 8 years ago, I went along to my doctor to have a blood test, and she then rang me back to tell me that I had diabetes, type 2 diabetes, where your blood sugars are too high. Very common in the UK, very common in Sweden, particularly as you get older. And also a family history. So my father had had diabetes at about my age, and he then died at the age of 74 from complications, because diabetes is a horrible disease, and unfortunately it doubles your risk of having a heart attack, it doubles your risk of dementia, all sorts of things. So anyway, he had died, and so when she told me you have diabetes, I was very upset.
Oh, yes.
But I didn't want to start on medication, so I went off to find out if I could cure myself of diabetes. And I was told by British doctors this was impossible. You can't cure diabetes. Diabetes always goes on. All you can do is take the medication and hope.
Really?
So I started speaking to some American researchers who said that isn't true. We have quite good evidence showing that it's possible. And they said it's one way to do it is through something called intermittent fasting, where you cut your calories 2 or 3 days a week. And by doing so, you help the pancreas come back to life. So I thought that's interesting. And I persuaded the BBC to let me make a film about it. And I went off and I would be the subject. I would see if I could cure myself of diabetes. So I went off to the US. I met lots of doctors, spoke to experts, and then I invented my own form of diet, which I called the 5-2 diet. So what I did there is I cut my calories 2 days a week and ate a healthy diet the other days. And on that diet, I lost 10 kilos in 8 weeks, and my blood sugars went back to normal. So whether
incredible, fantastic.
Yep. So I was cured, and 8 years on, my blood sugars are completely normal. Diabetes never come back. So as you can imagine, I got very excited by this, and I wrote a book, which was actually a bestseller in Sweden as well.
Yes, it was. Yes,
about intermittent fasting.
And you have touched base with one of the Swedish professors who's also part of the 1.6 medical expertise group called Kerstin Brismar.
Absolutely, big fan of her. When I came over to a press conference, when I came over to a press conference in Sweden, she was there, and we met, and she started doing some research, and I've been back a few times to talk to her, and she's found some very promising results. She's a very, very good scientist, and with a particular interest in type 2 diabetes. So do say hello to her from me.
Yes,
and
I will.
Say I'm a big fan of what she does. But I'm also been doing work with researchers in the UK because this idea is still not widely accepted around the world. That you can reverse diabetes. It's still seen as, but there have been some big studies in the UK and also in Australia showing that if you lose around 10 kilos and keep it off, then in most people, you can get them off medication. So that is a big discovery. Again, I wrote a book about that, which was called The Fast 800, which was published in Sweden.
Yes.
And we also have a website called thefast800.com. I'm afraid it's in English, but if anyone wants to go there and start a Swedish section or ask questions or find out, then it is a remarkably effective way of helping people with diabetes. And there is so much good research out there now. And as I said, sadly, doctors are still not entirely caught up with the science yet, but I'm sure they will.
Oh, well, let's really hope so, and let's debate and tell them that they must. I mean, you are a living proof that this works.
Absolutely, but as I said, there have been 3 big clinical trials involving around 800 patients, and followed for 3 years, and around half the patients who do this rapid weight loss diet, they're able to come off all medication. And certainly after 2 or 3 years, they've still kept the weight off, average weight loss of around 8 kilos. And compared to people following standard advice, they're much, much healthier. So the big message is that you can cure type 2 diabetes, you can reverse it. Although obviously if you put the weight back on again, then it may return. But it will save government so much money. It will save people so much misery. And we know that type 2 diabetes is a big, big problem as people get older and particularly as they get fatter. So I have become a huge fan of this rapid weight loss approach, not just for diabetes, but for other conditions like arthritis and also for dementia, because there's some good evidence now that if you do the program, it reduces your risk of dementia. And of course, it helps you with sleep, because one of the reasons people sleep badly is because they're carrying too much weight, and that makes them snore.
Yes, that's true. But we all know that there also are some some other people who are not overweight who still have problems with sleeping.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Interestingly, with things like type 2 diabetes, you can be a normal weight and still develop type 2 diabetes. That seems to be partly genetics and also partly the fact that you still got too much fat around the tummy. The worst sort of fat is the fat around the stomach, and more than your BMI. So I tell people the best thing you can do is to make sure that your waist is less than half your height. And one way to do that is you get a bit of string, and you measure it up from your head to your toes. You cut a bit of string, you fold it in half, and then you see if it will fit around your tummy. If it doesn't fit, then that would suggest you're carrying a bit too much stomach weight, and it would be a good idea to lose it. So fat on the bottom is fine. Fat on the arms is fine. It's fat around the tummy that's not fine.
No. Oh, well, it sounds so simple, and it's so good to get these little extra tips how to measure and how to find out if you are at risk when it comes to these serious problems. Now, when it comes to dementia, you say that this method, the 5-2 method, is also working and helping.
Yes, there have been a number of animal studies. It certainly works in rats and in monkeys. They did a study at the National Institutes on Aging, which is a big center in the US, and they found that they had these rats who were bred so that they develop dementia early, and they normally develop it at 1 year. But when they were put on the 5-2 diet, they developed it at 2 years. So that's the difference between getting it at the age of 40 or the age of 80 or 90. And they also found that if they put them on a junk food diet, then they developed dementia earlier. So the neuroscientist who did that research is doing a big study at the moment. He's been doing it for 4 years, where he gets people who are at risk of dementia, and he's put them either on the 5-2 diet or just standard, and he says the results are very exciting, but he's going to be publishing later next year. So that will be next year. So there is very good data emerging about the benefits of intermittent fasting, which is why, but it takes a long time. So when you say fasting, excuse me for interrupting, does it mean that 2 days of the week you don't eat at all, or no? You eat about 800 calories.
Okay.
So you can eat a generous amount of food. It's just perhaps not eating quite as much as you normally do. So it's actually very doable. And I do suggest if you do it back to back. So say Monday, Tuesday, or Tuesday, Wednesday. And 800 calories, make sure you're getting plenty of, protein. So you have some fish for breakfast. I love fish for breakfast. Full of protein, and then plenty of vegetables, and maybe soup for lunch, and then big pile of vegetables, and maybe some meat or fish or whatever you fancy in the evening. So as long as you don't eat junk food, you can get a very good meal for 800 calories.
And tell me, I know that you and your wife, who is also a doctor, your wife is, and you work together, and you said that she writes recipes for your books.
Yes, that's right. If you want, you can find her on Instagram. If you go and look for Dr. Claire Bailey, that's spelled C-L-A-R-E, Bailey, B-A-I-L-E-Y. If you look there, you can see her showing you how to cook these meals, and you can also see me cooking these meals and our children cooking these meals. So during COVID lockdown, we shot a lot of videos and posted them on Instagram. So you can get a flavor of that.
Yes.
If you want to see some interesting recipes. She produces food which is very tasty, very nutritious, but which is quite low in calories. And she's also been doing research with Oxford University, doing these low-calorie meals with people who are overweight or obese, and they found average weight loss when they did the program of 9.5 kilos in 8 weeks, which was sustained.
Which was sustained. This is the main thing, right?
That's the main thing, exactly. So they are going to keep following them for a year or 2 years to see. But the thing is that if you have a fiber-rich and you have a very healthy diet, and then you stop feeling hungry in a surprisingly short period of time. Because you think 800 calories sounds terrible, nothing, I'm going to starve. But no, if you have the right food, then it's actually quite filling. And what was really good is the people who were doing the 800 calorie diet, they were also able to come off all their medication for blood pressure, for arthritis, for diabetes. Yeah. So that was fantastic. And as I said, they published that recently in a journal. So they are looking to do a bigger, longer study. But Claire was very, very pleased by that, because the outcome of the study was even better than anyone had predicted. And the professor at Oxford was thrilled. She said she had never seen anything like it. And they did it very cheaply, and they did it in general practice with normal patients. And they did remarkably well. So I'm very proud of my wife. She does. She does really good science, and she does also very good recipes. Very, very tasty. And they're all.
Is she also involved in your book, which you are now in here to introduce, about sleep?
Yes, she is. So she again did the recipes in this book. You don't necessarily think about a sleep book as having recipes, but actually there is very good data now, very good information showing the impact of what you eat on your sleep. And one of the particular areas of interest Claire has is women going through the menopause, which I could talk about later, but that is a big problem for sleep. A lot of women, when they start to go through the menopause, it really messes with their sleep. So this diet also helps with the menopause. But anyway, so I got interested in sleep because I was a good sleeper when I was young. And then when we had children, not so good. And we had 4 children. So
you never slept.
No, quite. So on average, you lose about 6 years of good sleep after your first child. And then, and I and Claire shared it, but she was working. She was very busy working as a doctor. I was busy. So we shared it, but she recovered. I never really did. So I started sleeping very badly, and I was getting stressed at work, and I was also snoring very, very loudly.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
And that was about the time that I discovered the 5-2 diet. And one of the things that happened when I lost the weight is I immediately stopped snoring. So when I dropped below a certain weight, I lost the fat around my neck, and my snoring stopped. Suddenly, from being very, very loud, I went completely quiet. So that is one of the things that are in the book, which is about weight loss, but it's also about the food you eat, because we know from a lot of studies now of the impact that food has on your brain and on your mood. So, for example, there was a big study from Australia where they found that if you took people who suffered from moderate or severe depression and you got them to change their diet, so they started eating what I would describe as a Mediterranean diet, also similar to the Nordic diet. So it has lots of oily fish, it has vegetables, it has nuts, it has olive oil, it has legumes. It also has some red meat. That when they took them off a normal Australian diet and put them on this diet, within 8 weeks, a third of them were able to come off all medication. Their depression had gone away.
No kidding.
Not at all. And they said the reason seemed to be, and the closer they stuck to the diet, the more likely they were to be able to come off medication. So there were people there who had been on medication for depression for 20 years. And I spoke to them and they said it was like, you know, the veil had lifted. It was like it just all gone away. And they did another study recently, this time with students. And again, these were students at university. And again, they found that by getting them to change their diet, their rates of depression and anxiety halved in 3 weeks.
Yes, well, a lot of students do eat, at least in our country, a lot of junk food. And also, I think you're talking about sleeping poorly. We spend too much time in front of the computer and staying up late, watching all kinds of things on TV or in our iPads or whatever. And I suppose this couldn't be good for our sleep either.
Not at all. So in the book, I talk a little bit about the history of sleep and then about the stages of sleep, because I think a lot of people don't understand what happens to them when they go to sleep, because obviously you're not aware of it. But I say it's a bit like being a diver going into the sea, because you start off by going through stage 1, which is quite light sleep up here. Then during the first bit, you go down into deep sleep right down here. And then after about 60 minutes or 90 minutes, you come up again to the surface. You actually wake up, although you probably don't remember it. And then you go down again into deep sleep and so on through the night. Except later in the night, you do this remarkable thing where instead of going down into deep sleep and coming up, you go into what's called REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, where your eyes flicker. And that is the stage at which you do a lot of dreaming. And these different stages of sleep are for different reasons. So you need the deep sleep. The deep sleep is very good for the brain. During deep sleep, your brainwashing happens. They discovered about 2 years ago these channels in the brain which open up during deep sleep. And fluid rushes through it. It just washes out all the junk. So that happens during deep sleep. And your memories also, the short-term memories are moved from one part of the brain to another part of the brain and get stored. So if you don't get enough deep sleep, you are at risk of dementia and you are at risk of problems with your memory. And you're also at risk of infections, because it is when you are in deep sleep that you produce things like antibodies. So we know from a big American study that people who sleep less than 6 hours a night are 4 times more likely to get an infection than people who sleep for more than 7 hours. Their immune system is not as good. So that's why with COVID-19 in particular and with the flu, you know, this is a really, really important time to prioritize sleep, because as I said, that is critically during deep sleep when your immune system is primed and the elements are produced. And when you're in REM sleep, which is the other bit, which happens later, that's kind of when your emotions get processed. So when you're having dreams, your dreams are really about your emotional life. It is your brain trying to make sense of the emotional turmoil of the day. So if you don't get enough REM sleep, then you feel tired and irritable and angry and confused. So these are just some of the things that sleep does. And if you don't get either enough deep sleep or enough REM sleep, then you will be in trouble.
But tell us then, Dr. Mosley, what can we do to achieve the deep sleep and the REM sleep?
Sure. So I think the first thing, as you said, is you need to create a pattern. So you need to get up at the same time every morning, even when it's the weekend. Your body likes to have a pattern. So I get up at around 7:30 every morning, except for this morning where I had to get up at 5 to do some Swedish breakfast television. It was 5 UK time, but 6 o'clock in Sweden. So I was on a breakfast show talking about sleep this morning, SVT, I think. Anyway, normally I get up about 7 and I go outside for a bit of a walk because you need to get bright light. Now, in Sweden, obviously, you have a problem but you can see one of these. This is my light box. And I use that during the winter in the morning because there isn't enough light. So as you can see, the reflection on my face, I'm at the computer, but I'm getting all this light. And it not only helps you with your sleep, but it also helps you if you suffer from seasonal affective disorder, which is a type of depression which is very common in Sweden during the winter months. And light boxes are a great way. And if there's enough early morning light going out, there's a lot of evidence now that we simply don't get exposed to enough light. And that seems to be a major cause, again, of depression, but also a major cause of disrupted biorhythms. So first thing in the morning, get some light. It'll perk you up. It'll wake you up, even better than a cup of coffee, honestly.
Really? Oh.
Yeah.
But if we take both light and coffee, then?
Even better. But with coffee, probably best to try and stop drinking it. I stop about 11 in the morning because if you start to drink it later in the day, it'll probably disrupt your sleep. It's also best to do your exercise in the morning because, again, it's better than later. If exercise is good for sleep, along with walking and running. It's very important that you do press-ups and squats. Men, women, if you are not good at press-up, start by your knees. But the press-up is probably the single best exercise you can do. And after the age of about 30, you start to lose muscle. If you don't do resistance exercise, so you will lose about 5% of your muscle mass for every 10 years that goes by.
Do you use the expression sarcopenia?
No.
Losing muscles. This is something we learned not too long ago.
So it's really important as you get older, but it's also really important if you go on a diet, because when you lose weight, you want it to be fat and not muscle. So I do every morning when I get out of bed, before I do anything else, I do my exercises. So I do 50 press-ups and 50 squats every morning. I'm 64, so you can do it at any age.
Oh, okay.
And then, as I said, I try to eat a Mediterranean sort of diet throughout the day. My wife has some brilliant recipes. We try them, we test them. I often have fish for breakfast. Sometimes I have eggs for breakfast, omelets, things like that. And then, as I said, a healthy lunch. And these things the fiber in the vegetables, it's important to have plenty of vegetables. The fiber will feed your gut bacteria, and they in turn are good for the brain, and they will help you sleep. And then as you go through the day, I don't recommend having a nap unless you have to. I don't recommend an afternoon sleep because that will cut your sleep drive. So it is better if you struggle with sleep. And as you come to the nighttime, it's best to avoid light. Do not use bright lights at night because that will wake you up. And do not have a television in your bedroom. Do not have your laptop or computers. Try about 2 hours before you go to bed. Try to wind down, read a book, listen to music, do something which is kind of gentle. Maybe write a diary. Write in it 3 good things that happened to you that day. These things are all great ways of winding down. And then when you go to bed, if you have problems going to sleep, then only go to bed when you feel tired. If you have problems going to sleep, the worst thing you can do is to go into bed and then lie there and worry or watch television. What you have to learn to do is to teach your brain that bed is about sleep and about sex and about nothing else.
Okay.
So you have to associate bed. Bed is sleep and sex and nothing else. So if you have difficulty going to sleep, then don't go to bed until you feel tired. And the same is true if you wake up in the middle of the night. So a lot of people wake up at 3 in the morning and they lie there and they worry about the day. The best thing you can do is to get out of bed. You go and find a quiet corner of your house. you listen to music, you read a really boring book. I have very boring books or books you have read before, nothing exciting.
No.
And you just sit there in with a gentle light on, and you just read and relax until you feel tired. And then you go to bed. And that is one of the best ways of breaking the cycle. And so the worst thing you can do is lie in bed and worry, because you are teaching your brain that that's what bed is about. Bed is somewhere which is horrible. You don't like it. You worry. You fear the bed. You've got to learn to love the bed. The bed is somewhere where you just go to sleep. And that is one of the powerful insights from sleep research. And the same is true if you find, there is a technique in the book. In the book, I list all the things, and there's a lot of things you can do. But one of the more powerful things you can do, particularly if you suffer from long-term insomnia, is to spend less time in bed. So people think, I'm really tired, that means I must go and spend time in bed. But if they're awake in bed, that's the worst thing. So what I actually suggest in the book is you aim to wake up at the same time every morning, 7 o'clock. But instead of going to bed at, say, 10 or 11, you go to bed at midnight or maybe 1 a.m. So you are reducing the amount of time you spend in bed, and you are getting tired. But that means the next night or the next night, when you go to bed, you will just crash out like that. And again, what you're doing is you're teaching your brain to associate bed with sleep. And this technique I've just described, called sleep restriction, is probably the best way of curing insomnia. It is better than drugs. It is better than medication. It is better than almost anything else. And it has been studied now for 40 years. And I'm just amazed that no one else has written about it.
Oh. When you say it's been studied for 40 years, I mean, we've never really heard it spelled out like this before.
No, it is quite well known in people who practice, psychologists who look at insomnia. There is a thing called CBT for insomnia, and that is one of the techniques they use. The ideas behind this were originally developed in the United States in the 1980s, and they did a big study there where they took, I think it was 80 people who had had insomnia for up to 20 years, and they did this technique. And they were on multiple drugs for insomnia, pills, sleeping pills. And at the end of that time, 70% of them had able to come off all medication, and their insomnia was cured. And they visited them a year later, 2 years later, they were still absolutely fine. So there is a real depth of research. And again, I'm kind of amazed that this is not more widely known, which is kind of why I wanted to write the book, because there is so much good science out there, which for strange reasons has not made its way into the public awareness, let alone into medical awareness. So this thing can be done. It's probably best done with your doctor if they know about it. Even better if you can do it with a psychologist who is trained, but you can certainly do it by yourself. If you read my book, I detail a detailed program of how to do it. And it is safe, and it is very, very effective. The other thing I would say, if you are somebody who is going through the menopause really messes with sleep, because, hot flushes, change of mood, you're eating more than you normally would, you're putting on sleep, you feel irritable, tired, and things like that. And these techniques will help, but I would also recommend hormone replacement therapy. My wife is a fan of hormone replacement therapy. I know it's not for everyone, but a lot of the fears about it are based on very old studies. And these days there are a host of different ways you can creams, and it doesn't have to be pills. So that's one thing I would say, is that if you are suffering, then it would be worth exploring with your doctor different forms of hormone replacement therapy. As I said, my wife is a big fan. She's been on it for some years now, and she puts a lot of her patients on it, and they say they just start sleeping so much better afterwards.
Well, this is very good advice, I think. Thank you so much. And of course, it is true that we have a lot of myths around hormone replacement still living out there because of these studies that came out in 2002,
Yep.
which is now a long time ago. And of course, we know a lot of the scientists know much and researchers know much better today. So thank you for that advice. Now, when it comes to these sleep restrictions, I just wonder, I mean, someone who has suffered from insomnia for some time, how long, I mean, if you obviously follow your advice and you say that, okay, I'm not falling asleep, so I get up and well, maybe I get a 3 hours of sleep. How long can that go on before I collapse?
Sure. So what I do say is you should never aim to spend less than 6 hours in bed. 6 hours is the minimum. Now, you're probably not going to sleep all that time. In the book, I also introduce this idea of sleep efficiency, because sleep efficiency you can calculate by taking the amount of time you spend in bed, the amount of time you spend asleep in bed, and divide by the amount of time in bed. So if you sleep for 7 hours, you're in bed for 8 hours, then it's 7 over 8, which is about 82%. And that is pretty good. Most people spend a lot of the night waking up, falling asleep, waking up, falling asleep, and then they may not even be aware of it. One way of telling is to get one of these sleep things like Fitbit. You need one with a heart rate monitor, because the heart rate monitor is a good way of telling the machine when you're asleep, because what happens when you start to sleep is your heart rate drops down. It is one of the signals to your body that tells the body that it's time to go to sleep. And for this reason, it is not a good idea to do exercise near bedtime. It is also not a good idea to eat near bedtime, because when you eat, your body has to digest the food, it revs up, your heart rate goes up, and then you'll find it hard to go to sleep. So it's the drop in heart rate which drives sleep. And another technique you might try are breathing exercises, again, if you're lying in bed. And one of the best one is called 4-2-6. And you breathe in through your nose to a count of 4, hold it for 2, and then out through your mouth to a count of 6. And you do that for 2 or 3 minutes. And what that does is it makes your heart rate slow. It turns on what's called the parasympathetic drive. So your heart rate will come down, your anxiety levels will come down, you will feel calmer. And all of this really just through breathing exercises. And this, again, is something that Hindus have known for a long time. It's a big part of, some religions. The breathing exercises, it's a form of mindful meditation. And it is a really useful way of reducing stress. But go back to your original question. What I do say is do not spend less than 6 hours in bed any night. So that is the minimum. And you do that for, say, you go to bed at 1 and you get up at 7. And you'll find within a week or two, you will be falling asleep really fast. And then you extend it. So you then extend it to 6.5 hours, to 7 hours, to 7.5. What you've done is you've retrained your brain, and now you can start to reintroduce. It's very like my diet. You start with a small amount, and then you gradually reintroduce more food. And as you do so, your body kind of has made some fundamental changes. And with the sleep, your brain has made fundamental changes. I mean, in my books, I always put references down to the scientific research. So if you want to explore the science, it's very easy to do. All the references are in the book, and you can find them all online if you want to find out more.
Oh, well, we certainly do. Now, you have taught us a lot about 5-2 diet and about diabetes, and about also not getting into too early, at least the Alzheimer's, I guess, in the end. And now it's about the sleeping patterns to get a better sleep. So what are you diving into next?
So I think there are 4 pillars for a really healthy life. One is to be a decent weight. As I said, pass the string test. Make sure your waist is not too big. The second thing is activity. exercise, brisk walking, press-ups, squats, whatever it may be. The third thing is sleep. Sleep is really, really important for mental health, physical health, everything like that. And the fourth is stress and anxiety. And that is kind of what I will probably write about next. It's kind of there because what you eat has a big effect on your brain. How well you sleep has a big effect on stress and anxiety. And mental health is the #1 problem worldwide. Anxiety, depression, these are very big problems around the world. And the major cause, they are the #1 cause of illness around the world. So that's kind of what I want to write about. It will have some of these elements in it, but I'm going to be exploring more of the science of what goes on in your brain and ways to combat it. Because I started out originally in psychiatry, so this is kind of brings me round. And we know there are lots of different ways of helping reduce stress, which are not the conventional ways. The conventional ways are, take a drug, and that works in some people, but a lot of people don't like taking the drug, and often when they stop taking the drug, the depression just comes back. So what I want to do is explore ways, lifestyle changes, which will have a profound effect on the brain. So that's, I think, what it'll be about next. It'll be about the brain, it'll be about anxiety, about depression, and that sort of stuff.
Oh, incredible. We had a webinar Monday this week, a few days ago, and the title was called Together Against Depression, in cooperation with the Foundation for Mental Health. And we have a long cooperation with them and giving more lectures in the future. So we're looking forward to, again, your next book. I mean, you have such a wonderful brain, and I mean, it's incredible what you're doing to help humanity, I must say. Fantastic, Michael. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, we have, is there anything you'd like to add before we say goodbye this evening?
Not at all. As I said, if you'd like more information, particularly about weight loss, then I have a website called thefast800.com, and I can send you details of that, and people can go there and find out more about the research in other areas apart from sleep. So thank you very much. Anyway, it's been great fun and lovely questions, and I hope you all sleep well tonight.
Thank you. Yes, and of course we must finish our talk because we have to have the dinner before 3 hours before we go to bed. Yeah. We look forward to meeting you again. Thank you so much, Michael, and all the best for the future.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Och då, kära vänner, så får vi runda av lite grann. Men visst var det spännande att möta Michael Mosley och så mycket otrolig kunskap som han förmedlar, tycker jag. Det känns verkligen inspirerande på många sätt. Och det är mycket att ta del av där. Så vi ser som sagt fram emot att kunna förmedla mer i framtiden om detta. Ja, men då ska jag tacka så mycket för ikväll. Och skynda mig nu till middagen så att det hinner bli 3 timmar innan man går och lägger sig. Så tack för ikväll, tack Anette och tack alla ni som har varit med och tittat och lyssnat. Och väl möts snart igen. Tack för ikväll.